of Alexander and some of Hercules, of Hector and Lysander and such great names as these. But of all...
Hello and welcome to this Battlemech overview. Today we are going to be looking at Coventry Works Commando, which is the Lyran Commonwealth, Lyran Alliance, depending on when you're looking at it. Most efficient light mech and the most produced light mech in existence in that category. Of course, if we're looking at the most produced mech, we're still going to look at the Locust, Wasp, and Stinger. The three bugs at 20 tons are some of the most common mech ever built in general, but as a single unit by a single company, the Commando probably beats them in terms of, percentage of production. It is a surprising mech in general. Here we've got two examples of early Commandos. You can tell from the weird helmet head on it. This is a weird situation that comes from a poor understanding of blueprints by a production line for an extended period of times. You're going to see the two different types of Commandos. Those like these two with the side sensor and the tilted helmet is uncommon, but common enough that you're going to see it every once in a while, and you're going to see the one with the full visor as well. It's just a stylistic body kit issue. There's no major difference between the two Commando model. The sensor array works about the same. In the end, I've spoken to people who piloted both the models, and they said that they don't notice much of a difference between the two over time. The Commando, at least to our general knowledge with everything I've dug up, is the first light mech to ever really enter full production before even the deployment of the WSP-1 Wasp, which was released almost in the same time frame, let's be honest, but the Commando predates it by just a little bit, here at 25 ton instead of 20 tons. It's also the second homegrown mech built by the Lyran Commonwealth after their BWP X1 Ymir, which was not the most successful model ever built. A later model would be a little bit more popular, but it never caught on, and you probably will only see Ymir that have been either completely rebuilt from scratch or recent models that came out of odd factories, building retrotech models and odd side upgrades, basically. The original production run of the Commando as the glorious achievement of winning the Battle of Nox, which is the first full-blown Battlemech against Battlemech engagement in history. Of course, there were only Commandos there. I mean, the Lyran Commonwealth dropped with their former Archon down and started fighting the Draconis Combine, second Sword of Light, which was primarily equipped with GLD-1R Gladiators. When the units fought, I would be expecting the Lyran Commonwealth to have Mackies, because those were common enough at the time, or at least copies of the Mackie, Ymirs, and a whole bunch of Commandos. Those would have been able to overrun and probably outrun and outfight the Gladiator 1R, which was an old model with limited capabilities. Using all of that and the superior leadership of former Archon Michael Steiner's forces, they managed to take the day, destroying the enemy regimental HQ before the Combine actually killed former Archon Steiner in the mission. We are not told what Archon Steiner was piloting at the time. I would expect him to be in either a Mackie or a Ymir. Maybe an odd heavy mech would have been dropped as well. There were a few already in production at the time. But 2475 is really early in Battlemech combat deployment. Let's have a look at the Commando that actually fought that battle with the COM-1A. This one came out of Coventry Defense Conglomerate, which now is Coventry Metal Works, and it was designed by Andrew Barkalow, and I have no idea what led him to design a light mech to begin with. Everybody was really playing in the heavy and assault mech category. I'm not sure if anybody was really looking at light mechs seriously at the time, so that might have been what drove them to make that selection. Here we do see the standard visor helmet of the Commando rather than the side helmet. It was meant originally to be a fast attacker and flanker for your assault mechs and your rare heavy mechs. It came with a primitive 150 fusion engine, which was kept in later models. It's just they were less efficient back in the day, so you would get a top speed of about 85 kilometers per hour rather than 96 kilometers per hour you normally are able to get with a modern Commando using the same engine. And it was protected by 5 tons of primitive armor, which was 66% coverage compared to what we normally see as modern armor. And if we compare it to, ferrofibrous, which is standard more or less nowadays, it's even less. It only really carried one weapon, which was an Odin large laser. It's a pretty good weapon. It gives you a lot of punch at a decent range. And for a skirmisher, very efficient in the end. But it's not at all what you would expect from a Commando nowadays. Really, when people talk about the Commando, this is the one that people really think of, which is the COM-2D, which has been in production since 2486, so pretty much forever at this point. Once again, it's meant an harasser flanker with that GM150 fusion engine. Pretty decent top speed at 96 kilometers per hour, but it normally doesn't have jump jets. It's got 4 tons of standard armor and just the standard bare bones 10 heat sinks that come built in any fusion engine. For its primary weapon, it's completely different from that 1A model. It's got 10 tubes of SRM with a 6 tube in the center torso and a 4 tube in the right arm. For your backup, you've got a medium laser mounted on the left arm. The Commando is one of the smallest mechs ever built, giving it a notorious ability to dodge attacks. Just because it's just smaller than everything, you usually overcompensate and shoot over it if you're not careful or you don't know much about it, or if the sensor buffers on it are not set up properly. You do have to be careful though, unless you have someone look it over and fix a few issues. A lot of the actuators are actually not well protected. You've got external parts in most of them, and they can easily be damaged unless, once again, an engineer looks them over. There were actually very few Commando variants that appeared during the Succession War, even though it would have been expected at the time. One of the reasons for it is really that the Lyran kept pretty much a monopoly on the machine. So you don't have any of those regional variants like you see with the Warhammer or Marauder. You've had Lyran Commandos and Lyran Commando accessories, basically. And there were basically 3 variants that came through, and none of them were really super popular. The 1B, which came out in 2015, had a large laser, 2 tubes of SRM, and a medium laser. It really didn't rock the charts. You won't see many of those running around, but it's closer to that original model, and I think for a harasser, it's not terrible. You lose some of that critical seeking capability and vehicle destruction capability from the SRM, but you get more lasers, so you're able to raid and stay out of sight longer. The 1C version takes out all of the missiles and put an AC-2 instead. This is pointless. This is a useless variant that shouldn't even exist. If you see one, you probably want to dismantle it and maybe rebuild it as something useful. The 3A variant mounts 2 SRM-6, a medium laser, and a flamer. Of course, to fit all that in, you needed to take out a ton of armor. So it's really, really fragile. It packs a huge punch and can actually take out infantry fairly well, especially if you load those SRM with Inferno rounds. I have never really seen one of those in production or in the factory, probably because of how fragile they are. They just never stuck around. As with most things, the Commando evolved in the mid-31st century as technology was being rediscovered and brought back forward, and this brought up the 5S model. Rather than using a fancy engine, the Commando 5S uses an endosteel chassis, ferrofibrous armor, and cases to give it a better protection overall, while increasing the price by not a huge margin. One of the big differences that you're going to see is that most 5S Commandos have that straight helmet rather than the sideways one, and as far as weapon goes, it is pretty much the same thing, except that the 6-tube SRM is linked to an Artemis 4 targeting system, and the 4-tube of SRM is replaced by a Streak 2-tube. So you get a little bit less firepower, but more accuracy. So it's a nice trade-off. There's other things that they could have done, but it works really well with the technology that was already available around 3049. Coventry went a step further in 3064 with the 7S Commando. It uses that fancy new light engine that the Lyrans developed and uses an endosteel chassis. The price does skyrocket because of that engine, but you have to live with what you get. As far as weapon goes, you have an ER medium laser in each arm, so you've got more direct firepower, and a pair of 2-tube Streak SRMs, and a 4-tube Artemis linked SRM. I really think it would have been more efficient to just have 2 Streak 4, that she would share ammo and weight about the same, actually weigh exactly the same, and the technology was kind of available at the time. It wasn't a fancy, completely out of the ordinary kind of a part to include. I'm not sure what the engineers were thinking here. It might have been just a supply issue, it might have been a million different things, but that's what we have to deal with when looking at the 7S Commando. Next up is our regular Blakist configuration, which is almost extinct, since those were produced for a very short period of time by people nobody really likes. The 7B Commando goes a little bit further, I guess, in the same direction, putting in a small cockpit so the pilot does feel a bit squeezed. Gives you a little bit more room to play with equipment. You only have one ER medium laser on it, but you've got 2 flamers, so you can burn infantry and cause some mayhem this way. And for missiles, you got 2 regular SRM-4 with case-protected ammo. It is also the first commando, well, at least stock commando, to be able to jump for about 120 meters, which is not as far as it could go, but it's far enough to be useful to reposition. Not a terrible configuration. I probably would have gone with 2 ER medium lasers and a standard cockpit, and overall, I think there's a lot of things here that are not to my liking, but it's what the Blakist did to feed their militia and their ever-growing need for more units. Now we're going to look at the 2 most recent model, which are the 8S and 9S series. The 8S actually use an XL175 rather than the old 150 to give it a top speed of 110 kilometers per hour or so, which is pretty fast for a commando. And it even loads a supercharger in to give you bursts of speed up to 140 kilometers per hour if you don't mind your engine potentially blowing up. It's not heavily armed, it only really carries a pair of Streak 2 tubes protected by case 2 for the ammo, and 2 ER medium lasers on the left arm. It's still pretty decent for a light mech at 25 tons, and with that kind of speed, it makes it able to get into the right position, do the damage, and come back. One thing that I do find weird is that it uses a C3 boosted slave to share targeting information with other units in its lance, but that would require there to be a master computer around, and those are mainly used by House Steiner. To have those loaded on a generally Commonwealth Alliance mech is really odd. I'm pretty sure there are some master units in the Lyran Commonwealth, Lyran Alliance, but it just feels a bit odd. Last on the block is our 9S Commando, which is meant to be a support mech. Yeah, we're looking at a support commando. I don't like support mechs in the light category, at least not in the way a lot of people build support mechs, and this one follows that particular mindset pretty much to a T. The medium laser is replaced with a light PPC, which does give you additional range, and it's not that inefficient as far as a weapon goes. I do like light PPCs, even though they do have a minimum range. And the torsos mount a pair of multi-missile launchers, the 3 rack series, so you can shoot either SRMs or LRMs from that torso launcher. Gives you the same kind of firepower as that 6-tube SRM, but you also can shoot 6 tubes of LRMs. Not terrible, but I'm not a huge fan of small LRM racks in general. For some reason, you also have a pair of one-shot SRM2s, which are great at doing something, I guess. Maybe if you load them with tandem rounds or with infernos, they could be useful. But honestly, they could have used the space from these launchers to just add ammo to the main MML, or maybe load up another medium laser, or, you know, drop the concept altogether and go with a better setup for a commando. But you ask, are there weird periphery refits of the commando? Well, actually, there is. The Marian Hegemony has been building commandos recently with a model they've dubbed the 4H. As usual, rather than actually being sensible, the Marian kind of went crazy, took out the SRM launcher and just put in 6 rocket launcher 15s and a second medium laser for good measure. Is it terrible? Actually, it's not bad in my opinion. 2 medium lasers on a 25-ton mech that's decently fast makes it a good harasser, and those 6 rocket launchers, if you shoot them all at once, you're going to blow something up. And if you're sensible and shoot them one at a time, you're going to have 6 rounds of fairly devastating fire, which is usually long enough for a commando to hold something down before retreating. At the other end of things, obviously, we've got the clans. The thing is, there weren't that many commandos in the SLDF, as it was a Lyran mech, and the Lyran Commonwealth didn't want the Hegemony and the SLDF to have commandos. The few that were with the SLDF were actually deserters that had joined with Kerensky for the Amaris Civil War, and they were taken with the rest of the material during the Exodus. Clan Goliath Scorpion did find the majority of them in Brian caches and things like that to make a 2C model out of it. Unlike other 2C models, it's still at the same weight. If you look at a lot of 2C models, you'll see that they go down or up in tonnage, but this one, still the same speed, pretty much the same equipment as well, 4.5 ton of armor with clan cases, which is built in more or less on an endo steel chassis. Where it does shine, however, is 18 tubes of SRMs, 3416, supported by a pair of clan ER medium lasers, which do pack more punch than your regular inner sphere one. It's not the most efficient mech. You're going to run out of ammo fairly quickly, because you have a lot of SRM and not that much storage for them. Just like that Marian version, it goes in, punches what it needs to punch with all those missiles and lasers, and comes back after, so the heavier mechs can finish the job. The Commando has been around since the inception of mech warfare, and I don't see any reasons for it to really go away. It falls into a particular weight class with a particular role that is always going to be useful, and even with advances in technology, you don't even need the Commando to be at the cutting edge in order to stay efficient. Yes, you're probably going to see a few new versions pop out in the new years. Since they're mostly built by the Lyran and the Marian, we're probably not going to see that in our periphery neck of the wood unless someone steals them, basically. I have seen dumb periphery refits compared to what we've talked about before. I've repaired a few over the years, I refit a few over the years, Commandos are all over the place, even though they are exclusive to the Lyran Alliance and now Marian Hegemony. So I hope you guys have a very nice rest of your day. I thank you very much for listening to me for so long, and I will see you guys later. Bye-bye.